The National Defense Authorization is what we're looking at as the House last Friday passed probably one of the best bills in terms of correcting the policies that have been put in place, interjected by the Biden administration. Now, the left is spinning it that the House has interjected the culture wars into the NDAA, and the legacy media is parroting those claims. But House Republicans are merely responding to the Biden administration's imposing of social experimentation policies on the military, and in some cases, as we talked about with Senator Tuberville, in violation of the law. Joining me now, continuing here with me, is General Jerry Boykin. He's here to set the record straight on these, along with retired Marine Corps Lieutenant Colonel Tommy Waller. He is the president and CEO of the Center for Security Policy. Colonel Waller, welcome to Washington Watch. Semper Fi.
Semper Fi. Tony, thanks for having me on.
So I'm going to go to you first. Tell us about your separation from the military and your experiences as you were coming out in the policies that began to invade the military.
Sure. Tony, well, I retired from the Marines just this past March. And what I had done is given the Marine Corps a full year to answer my appeal. That appeal was for a religious accommodation for the vaccine mandate. Of course, like every other Marine just about, my original request was denied actually on the Marine Corps birthday, a blanket denial for just about everybody in the force. And so at the time, there were no units that would allow me to join. I had finished, thankfully, a successful command tour of the reserve components only Force Reconnaissance Company. And yet I was unhireable in the United States Marine Corps. And so after a year of waiting and, in fact, having my own family barred from entry of a military installation, I thought that it was enough time for them to figure out just how grossly they had violated the law and ethics with the enforcement of that mandate.
I mean, General, that's just what we were talking about. I mean, 8,400, I think that's just in the Army, driven out because they wouldn't get a vaccination. I mean, think of all of the funds spent to train those individuals, not to mention the personal experiences they had to go through in losing their positions.
Tony, I think this is the worst thing that I have seen in the military in 36 years that I spent serving this country. And it's not just that we were putting people out, it is that there was a continual pattern of harassment.
Yeah.
Now you think about that. You've got commanders out there harassing their people, but then we turn around and say, now you lead them into combat. You take them to war. And the reality there is that what individual who's been harassed by his chain of command is going to trust that chain of command to go into battle with them.
Right.
And it's just not going to happen that way.
Well, yeah, we're going to talk about that. I'm going to get, Colonel, I'm going to get to some clips of, we're looking at these claims that what Senator Tuberville is doing by holding up these promotions and what the House has now done by addressing a number of these woke policies in the NDAA is somehow threatening national security, undermining our nation's military. Here's a clip of John Kirby, coordinator for strategic communications at the White House. This, he said earlier this week, clip number 4.
And our policies, whether they're diversity, inclusion, and equity, or whether they're about transgender individuals who qualify physically and mentally to serve, to be able to do it with dignity, or whether it's about female service members, 1 in 5, or female family members being able to count on the kinds of health care and reproductive care specifically that they need to serve. That is a foundational, sacred obligation of military leaders across the river.
Colonel, I want to get you to respond to the DEI. We've seen this diversity, equity, and inclusion being infused into our nation's military. How does that impact our readiness in terms of having to take time away from actual training to spend on this woke nonsense?
So I think the DEI piece and the critical race theory is probably best described in a book by Lieutenant Colonel Matthew Lohmeyer. He is the Space Force officer that was forced to resign and leave the military after exposing what General Arbuckle said earlier in your interview, which is that critical race theory and then diversity, equity, inclusion programs are linked directly to Marxism. And so that's one very worrisome situation that we have to contend with. It, as you said, time is being wasted. But it's not just that, Tony. When you look at the priorities that the U.S. military leaders, not just the political administration, but the general officers, the civilian equivalents of those officers in the current Department of Defense, their priorities, go back to the, quote, extremism in the ranks stand down, right? I was a unit commander at the time. We were forced to do a stand down and take an entire huge, long period to conduct this training to root out, quote, extremists in the ranks. And you look at the material that we were provided, and that material was void of any mention of at least 6, quote, extremists in the ranks, and those would be jihadis. Right? I have 6 examples that I could point out where members of the armed forces either did violence against their fellow service members or sought to do so and were imprisoned for it on behalf of the global jihad movement and its doctrine, Sharia. None of those examples were in that material. It was examples that were, you know, somebody put C4 in the shape of a swastika. Okay, that's bad. But is that worthy of a gigantic extremism in the ranks stand down? You know, so it's not just that there are problematic policies like DEI and CRT. It's literally that we are purposefully, the leaders of the current U.S. military are purposely avoiding studying the very things that threaten the Constitution to which they took an oath.
Well, gentlemen, let me ask you this question. Is this intentional to weaken our military?
I don't think there's any question about it. I mean, give me any logical reason that you would see the kind of things that we're seeing in our military today, and you'd see the kind of commanders that we're having at the upper levels in there. And this, you've got to go all the way back, at least as far as Barack Obama. If you really want to understand, when he said, I'm going to fundamentally change this country, well, you got to start with the military. The military is a very important part of changing our society. And if you want to do that, you start with the military. And the military, now we're seeing the results of that effort.
So, Colonel, I'm going to ask you about that because, you know, I know having joined the Marine Corps right out of high school and still in touch with many Marines, and there's nothing about the Army here. I just haven't served in the Army. But the reality is men and women serve because they want to serve for something greater than themselves. They want to commit themselves to something that's bigger. The rank and file, are the troops going along with this?
So, Tony, thankfully, at the bottom levels, what I've seen is a lot of common sense and reason, right? So you may have general officers that will refuse to acknowledge the doctrines of our enemies have anything to do with why they fight. But at the ground level, there is a thirst for that kind of truth. There's still a hunger for it. And so that's encouraging. The problem is that there's going to be immense suffering in those ranks when we deploy our military against adversaries that we don't understand.
Right.
Look no further than the way that we left Afghanistan.
Yeah.
What an absolute travesty in the way that we did that. You saw no one held accountable, and you saw no one, you know, willing to resign and say, look, this is not a smart way to do it. I'm not your guy. You didn't see any of that.
So, General, let's go to the officer ranks. Is it conformity for promotion?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of careerism associated with today's senior leaders. And we've had periods in the military where that was the case, but I think that we clearly have that today, and it has been a matter of if you want to get ahead, you got to play the game. You got to play it by the rules that are established for you.
So how do we purge that type of thinking, which is clearly anathema to national defense and security?
Number one, we as a nation need to get a commander-in-chief that understands the military, cares about the military, and is willing to place a priority on the readiness of our military. Number two, you got to get officers in there that are warfighters, that want to be warfighters, that want to prepare their people for war. because we are doing them a big disservice when we waste our time doing this critical race theory stuff that does nothing but demoralize and divide these people. So we've got to have good leaders in there, and then we've got to have the right kind of material that they can practice with what they're going to use on the battlefield.
Colonel, you agree with that assessment?
I do. And I would also add something I know that's near and dear to General Boykin's heart, which is we have to restore the soul of our military. That's what's been degraded. I mean, you think about Matthew 10:28, right? Don't fear, do not fear those that can kill just the body and not the soul, but fear those that can kill the body and the soul in hell. The soul of the military is what's under attack. We need to be anchored to the foundation of truth and reason. The Constitution, this copy of the Constitution I have here was given to me by the parents of a Marine, their only child, who died under my command in Iraq. And they said, never forget what he died for. And I won't. And what's happened is the senior ranks of our military have become unanchored from truth, reason, from the Constitution. And Tony, I'll tell you, there was a book just launched this month. It's written by an active duty Navy commander, and it's called Defending the Constitution Behind Enemy Lines. And he makes the very well-articulated argument that, in fact, those that have violated the law to enforce that vaccine mandate are one of the greatest threats to the U.S. Constitution, a domestic enemy to it. And I think that's the truth. And so in order to reverse that, we've got to restore the soul of our military.
I could not agree more. And we hear this from the president, the commander-in-chief, that we're in a battle for the soul of our nation. I know a lot of times I don't think he realizes what he's saying. In this case, I think he is actually speaking truth. There is a battle for the soul of our nation. And I think these woke policies are what is constantly, steadily attacking the soul of our military. When I talk about soul, the element that there is transcendent truth and we can be anchored to it, and that there is something bigger than what we determine ourselves. And these policies are chipping away at that very foundation.
There's no question about it, and I think you may have said it earlier on this program here, but people need something to fight for. They have to have a cause. They have to have a transcendent cause that gives them a motivation to put on a uniform and to go into battle and protect their fellow soldiers or Marines or whatever it may be. And what we're doing, everything we're doing, is just destroying the morale and the sense of being, sense of purpose for those young men and women that are serving today.
Hollowing out our military. I want to play one more clip before we run out of time. This is the House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries last Friday after the NDAA passed the House. Clip number 11.
One of the amendments deals with the DoD subsidizing transgender care. Why do you think that needs to be something the DoD subsidizes? What's your justification for that versus it being something that's an elective surgery?
We have to take a step back and look at the totality of the United States military and its readiness. And I believe the Department of Defense has made the appropriate decision in its totality that every single segment of society should be welcomed.
Well, I think his vocabulary word for the week was totality. And in that word salad, what he dished up was really not much. But I want to address this issue because this is something that they're attacking from the Republican version of the NDAA. There is not a constitutional right to serve in our nation's military.
There is no constitutional right to serve. It is a privilege for you to be able to serve. There is nothing in our Constitution or in our laws that says everybody has that right. And going back again to the Obama administration, you started hearing that was a part of their theme.
Right.
Was everyone should have the right, and to include the people that have a different sexual identity or whatever it may be. And for him to use that in connection with the military and those young men and women that voluntarily go out there and serve and put their lives on the line is nonsense.
As we talked about, they get waivers, they get special treatment. Colonel, did you have any experience with that in the Marine Corps as you were serving in your last couple of years?
Well, I just want to address what we just saw was just the height of hypocrisy. If you really truly wanted, everyone to have an opportunity to serve, you wouldn't persecute those with strongly held religious beliefs.
Good point.
Then kick them out of the military, which is exactly what happened with that vaccine mandate we just spoke about. Tony, one of the things that worries me the most is that as I sit back and I reflect on what happened, the first part of that mandate was a data harvesting operation. If you recall, all throughout government, it was, hey, there's going to be a process. Just tell us what your strongly held religious beliefs are.
Yeah.
And we did that, right? And they documented that. And then secondly, it was, I think, a very well executed purge. They created the conditions. Lloyd Austin, when he gave that order, it was lawful. It was inoculate the force with an FDA-approved vaccine, and one didn't exist. That was a litmus test for the officer corps. And so, depending on how you look at it, I think we catastrophically failed.
Yeah, extremely good point, Colonel. Colonel Tommy Waller, I want to thank you for joining us today. Appreciate you being a part of the program.
Thank you for having me, sir.